Welcome to the Pop Cult Podcast. Here are your hosts, Ariana and Seth.
This is the Pop Cult Podcast. I'm Seth.
I'm Ariana.
And today we're going to be looking at two films that feature female protagonists going through transformative experiences. Later, we'll be looking at the Yorgos Lanthimos film starring Emma Stone, Poor Things. But first, we're going to be looking at a recent Nigerian release titled Mami Wata. In the oceanside village of E, the Reverend Mama Efe acts as an intermediary between the people and the all-powerful water deity Mami Wata. When a child is lost to a virus, Efe's devoted daughter warns her of unrest in the village. So this was the third film from director C.J. Obasa. I read a little bit about him before writing my notes. Of course, Nigerian, grew up there, was a fan of Hammer horror, Stephen King, and comic books growing up.
Okay.
For his first film is considered a zero-budget movie just for how cheap it was. But this is his third movie, and it premiered at Sundance in 2023 and won the World Dramatic Competition Award for its cinematography.
Okay.
He said for Mami Wata, two of his big influences in making the film were the works of Akira Kurosawa and David Lynch.
Okay.
Right. So the film only got a 3-week release in Nigeria, where most films have a theatrical run of up to 8 weeks.
Okay.
And so when Obasi was asked about this, he simply said that he's not ready to comment yet on why the run was cut short.
All right.
And for that, I feel that's indicative of Western indoctrination to global film-going audiences.
Yeah.
Where if you think about here in the Netherlands, every time we go by a movie theater, the posters are mainly films from where?
United States.
Exactly. So I saw someone referring to movie theaters outside the US as basically American propaganda houses.
That is not far-fetched.
Because very rarely are local films given the same kind of fanfare and marketing that these imported American films get.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably what happened is people going to the theater in Nigeria have a certain expectation of what they're going to see.
Mm-hmm.
And to them, the idea of seeing a Nigerian-made film is probably less than seeing some big budget American Hollywood piece of shit.
Yeah.
And which is a shame because that causes probably a lot of films to be ignored by the very cultures that they're made in and about.
Yeah.
So what did you think in general about Mami Wata?
Visually, this is a stunning film. It's high contrast, black and white. It's done in a way that it's like almost like having candy.
Mm-hmm.
And then towards the end, I thought it reminded me a lot of a samurai film.
It was the Kurosawa, probably.
Yes. Because the story was more localized for focus of it's deeply embedded within this community. But at the same time, once you start paying more attention, you're starting to understand this community and you're understanding the problems that it's having, that the people that are reacting, they're reacting correctly, but they're not doing the correct things. And that certain things are left unsaid despite the arguments that are being had. It's almost as if oh, well, the more you watch, the more you have an understanding versus being confused by it. I think also it reminded me of the reason I was oh, it reminds me of the samurai movies. It's here were two daughters that were bringing distress upon their community without meaning to, and then deciding, well, if we cause this, we are going to correct this.
Well, it feels very elemental.
Yeah.
In the storytelling, it feels it says the subtitle is a Western African folktale, and that's exactly what it feels like. The structure of the film is almost like little chapters. They'll have these quotes that kind of introduce a new section, and the relationships and conflicts feel very primordial. They're things that, oh, we've seen this before, but we're kind of going back to the root of it. This is where it began. And I think I thought the first part of the movie was good. Near the end, I feel like it did get a bit too chaotic and a little bit too. It becomes more grounded in the middle when I like the more esoteric weirdness of earlier on. We do
Yeah.
get the very, very ending scene. It gets back to the weirdness.
Yeah.
But the conflict in the film, which, and you talk about the photography before we get away from that. It reminded me of Barry Jenkins
Yes.
when he talked about the way just the physical film stock and how it was designed, regardless if we're talking about digital, wasn't designed with the idea of black skin.
Yeah.
And so often black people do not look the best they could on a lot of Western cameras and using Western made film because it's designed to accentuate white skin.
Especially with like the lighting, the coloring, it does not accentuate it well.
And so also recently I read there was a young black doctor in America who had to publish his own book that showed what diseases look like on the skin of black people because he realized all of the materials that he was shown in university and medical school showed white bodies with these symptoms. And he realized, oh, it's not going to look the exact same on black skin. So I need to make sure that doctors have this available to them. And so that's something where you can really tell that CJ Obasi put a lot of thought into this movie, knowing that he is going to make a movie that's going to be received by white audiences in the world, like it inevitably is. And especially if he's entering it into like Sundance. And his decisions about how to light and shoot the film, I think, were absolutely perfect because it does give it this like mythic sense.
Yes.
Where it feels like, oh, I'm watching like an ancient story that's happening, even though it's clearly happening in a contemporary context.
Yeah.
The themes of the film seemed fairly straightforward to me. It's a sort of femininity versus masculinity, or in other words, harmony versus dominance.
Yes.
What do you think about those themes in the movie and how they're showcased?
It's an interesting thing because at first you're not really sure if you're supposed to be on like the head woman's side or
Mama
not.
Effie.
Yeah. Because she's so involved in the mystic side, and then they're talking about how other tribes and like other towns, they have hospitals, they have schools,
Vaccines and medicine.
vaccines and medicines, and we're like, we're being left behind. As like, what are you providing for the future generation? And she's like, we're praying to a certain deity. She will provide us everything that we want. And people's like, but you haven't seen her and you can't prove that to her. And they're wanting that physical, like
Material,
the
yeah.
material, which is understandable, especially like when schools and
I would argue that the film isn't completely on Mama Effe's side. It
Yeah.
is show like one of the early scenes is a child dies who's in her care, and the disease the child has, we learn through some exposition, could have been prevented with a vaccine and medical attention.
yeah,
And so I think part of the film is wrestling with how much of the tradition do we cling to versus how much of this modernity do we allow in.
mm-hmm.
And I like that the film doesn't make judgment that either of these things is completely right or completely wrong,
Yeah.
which is the harmony part. Which
Yeah, and I think it's also the argument on how some people will just end up lying to you because the moment that like the group goes against like the Mama F like
FA.
FA, she like they give up their jewels, they give up things in order to ensure that they have hospitals and schools only for everybody to end up buying a ton of weapons.
Yeah.
And that they're just kind of like, we were lied to. They're saying they're going to make our own version of police and security, but what they're doing is like taunting people and becoming this awful thing that we were not before.
Well, because what I liked was both within the group that's rebelling and the group that's trying to stay true, it is a mix of men and women.
Mm-hmm.
So while it is femininity versus masculinity, it's not men versus women. It's more ideas of how we approach problems in our societies. Are we going to approach them through a caretaker's perspective, or are we going to approach them through a conqueror's perspective?
Yeah.
And because I found like there like with the child who dies, or there's a moment where some of the followers of Mami Wata, like one of them gets shot in the crossfire and dies,
Yeah.
and how there's an argument to be made that if, that side had weapons of their own, that person might not have gotten killed. And I like how the central character in the film, I think, is Priska,
Yeah.
who is the one daughter who stays loyal to Mama Fa, but is not the daughter who is prophesied to be the next intermediary.
Yeah.
And that's Zinwei, who I guess is she supposed to be older than Priska? I never understood the age dynamics between
I
those
thought
two.
she was younger
That's
than
what I
her.
thought too, but for whatever reason, they know that Zinwei is going to be the next intermediary when Mama Fa dies. And
Mhm.
Zinwei steals Mama Fa's seashell bracelet at the beginning. Because Mami Wata is essentially mother of water, is what
Yeah.
it is. She's the goddess of the ocean, which is seen as life, because this is a coastal village, and thus a lot of their survival and sustenance comes from the water.
Yeah.
And so Zinwei stealing the bracelet, and then she goes to the ocean at the beginning and doesn't see or experience anything. And then that becomes her moment of disillusion.
Yeah.
And what do you think of this Zinwei character? Because there's a big chunk of the movie where she just kind of disappears. But I feel like she's the catalyst that starts all of this.
Yeah, I thought she was complicated. At first I was like, I don't know if her sister's going to forgive her, but she easily does. Um, it's one where I don't know how I feel about the fact that she just disappears for a while. And so it's hard to tell like what the story was going to be and why was it that she was of importance.
Because, yeah, so it really feels like Priska is, to me, the character who's going to carry the village forward into the future. That's the vibe I got at the end.
Yeah, at the least like she was the one that like wanting to make sure that the community was like fine.
Because when Mami Wata does appear,
Mhm.
it's the same actress who plays Priska playing Mami Wata, was it
Yeah.
not? Yeah, that's what I thought. And so to me, that visually symbolized like, oh, she's actually the intermediary. She's the one who's going to ensure that these people survive or not, because or at least she sees herself in the goddess.
Well, I think it was also supposed to be, I don't know if this was implied in the film because I feel like she has a discussion with her mother and how she's like the argument was about that child who dies at the beginning. Like you could have done something. And she's like, well, the water gives and the water takes. And she's like, I never questioned anything when the water gave me you.
Mhm.
So it's just like, was it supposed like this is not her birth child? Like this child she found like in
She
the
came out of the water.
yes.
Uh, but I think the water thing is very interesting to me because water as an element, a lot of people associate it with flow, right? And so the human condition and the human experience, there is sort of a flow to it. And I think that often that's where the disharmony of the film comes from, is people who are at odds with the flow of the way life is.
Hmm.
And in that, they become very dissatisfied,
Yeah.
especially among, it's predominantly men, but not all men. Uh, there are some women there too, but it's Jabi's group
Hmm.
who are sort of from very early on. He's very skeptical of Mama Fa, and then the minute the child dies, he kind of seizes upon that as evidence to the community that this woman has like she's lying. She doesn't have these. She's taking advantage of you, because part of it is Mama Fa's job in the community as healer, and so she's fed by the rest of the community. And his argument is that that food could be going to them and their families because he sees their contribution as beneficial and material.
Yeah.
And I thought that was very interesting because there is a big part of that argument where I do agree with Jabi that if a spiritual leader can't provide what they claim to be able to provide, then why would you sustain them as a part of the community?
Yeah.
So what do you think about that? Because I know my background is very evangelical fundamentalist, so any of that kind of like indigenous spirituality was just kind of absent from my upbringing. But you, being Puerto Rican, and
Hmm.
have at least a little bit more of a connection to those aspects, even though you didn't grow up very religious or anything.
No, we didn't grow up very religious, but my mom was not opposed of us getting our tarot cards read or having herbal baths put upon us or having like incense
Mhm.
all over us. it's this weird thing is like, well, even if she is doing whatever service that she provides, you're supposed to pay her, and that the payment is the food. So I think it's also like it's not just beyond healing, like you're doing counseling, you're listening to people, you're being the head person that's doing the negotiation. But I do understand where Javi's coming from because it's like they're not being provided with things that everyone else is starting to make negotiations on to improve themselves. And that's when like
Jesper.
yeah, like Jasper comes in and then like also Priska herself being like, I want schools, I want a hospital, I want vaccines. And but she's also sad in that she can't get her own mother to agree to them because she's just like, well, how are we supposed to trust them? But she's also not giving it like not giving into it because it's it's also like this fight against modernity and refusing to go into something new as if believing that all of your beliefs will be shed and left behind. But what if that is the blessing that your God is asking you to do anyways?
Or if that your beliefs evolve and become something new in the face of these
And if you're
developments. Yeah.
supposed to be like water, you're supposed to flow with it.
And I think that's because Priska sees herself in Mami Wata and she is the central figure. I think her perspective is the perspective that we as the audience are to latch onto, which is that center of how do I find harmony between these two people who are very materialistic versus people who are very esoteric and very spiritual. And that Priska realizes, oh, no, no, no. What Mami Wata wants from us is we have to find that flow, and that flow exists between these two things.
Yeah.
Where we have elements of both in our society, and that's what will make us thrive.
Mm-hmm.
I do, and I think that's supported by the fact that when they do have two people who show up who are Native African and clearly come from a more technologically developed community, they're never portrayed as having, duplicitous plans. They're very reasonable, kind-hearted people.
Yeah.
And that makes it so that like the only other outsider we really see is Jasper, who is such a fascinating character to me because I didn't really know where he was gonna go in the movie. And the turn that he takes, I think, is very surprising
Okay.
because the scene where I think it's where they have that sort of showdown with Mama Fa
Yeah.
and Jasper's reaction to what Jabi does. There's the immediate reaction where it looks like these two guys are about to like clash, but then how Jasper turns and becomes like the villain of the movie.
Yeah.
And I was not expecting that to happen. I thought he and Priska would have this kind of outsider perspective that would be kind of like what Priska was, which is, oh, I have to figure out how to make these two things work together.
Yeah.
And there's a comment early on about like there's sort of like an evil in our community that's influencing us, and we're ignoring the fact that it's there and we need to do something. And that's what seems to be happening to Jasper because he does seem to have like a personality shift that you could argue is like, oh, he's possessed by some like spirit of disruption.
Yeah. Or he came there with those ideas anyways.
Because he does seem very open to listening to Mama Efe when he first arrived.
Yeah.
What do you think that character's role was in the story? If Priska is who we're supposed to identify with, then who was Jasper as this outsider character?
I don't know. I think it was also like it was confusing because didn't like Mama Fa like cure him of something?
He washes up,
Yeah.
which made me think, oh, was he sent by Mami Wata?
Yeah.
But he's not. There was like an accident and he
Yeah.
fell overboard or something. And so she nurses him back to health.
Yeah, and like she even brings it up to him and he's sort of like it doesn't matter, like you're the past. Kind of like I think it's hard to read because it's like if he just supposed to be like this sole masculine the shift that he has because again you think that like Javi is going to be the character that ends up taking that role and they shift so I don't know if it's supposed to be because Javi knows her and has been in the community does not want to be seen as by his community members as the person who destroys what they know and love.
Well, he seems very eager to do that, though.
Yeah,
Like,
and then like it changes. So I don't I again I wouldn't I feel like there's something missing, but I can't blame it on the film. It's probably like more like
a cultural
yes.
background piece, yeah.
Mhm.
Like that there are archetypes that we just aren't familiar with because we aren't as well versed in that folklore.
Yeah.
That could be it. Um, so let's kind of talk about the performances. Rita Edochie as Mama Efe. What did you think of her in the film?
I think she carried herself with a certain type of power.
And I read she looks like an actress from what I've seen online that has like a very uh it's not like massive, but she's consistently worked as an actor in Nigeria for many years.
Yes.
And you could feel that in her performance.
Yeah.
Like there was a sort of gravitas and a weight to her. She I felt it out of everyone. She kind of understood the Shakespearean elements of this story,
Mhm.
which is that kind of like it's these people represent kind of fundamental concepts, and the purpose of the story is to see those concepts interact through these characters. And then at the end, we come out of it maybe not with a solid answer of what was right and what was wrong, but with maybe new questions. And that
Yeah.
was the point of the story is I'm not going to answer it, but I'm going to get you to think about it in a different way. But I found she did very good. Uh, and she embodied the role in a way that felt authentic to me.
Yes. Yes. I agree with that. She just there was such a power in even like the times that she wasn't speaking. As if like there was something behind the eyes that she was just like, I can't explain it to you. This is beyond like she didn't treat people like they were dumb. It was just sort of like there is stuff that you don't know without having the experience that I would have.
What about Emeka Amakaze, who played Jasper?
I thought he was great. I thought he was like very intimidating at times. And I thought like when he would confront especially Mama Efe, like it felt there was just a power and is also kind of like he felt very comfortable in the role. Like he knew what he was supposed to do.
Yeah. He reminded me a bit of Idris Elba.
Yeah.
I also thought at first he might be the actor who played Mr. Echo on Lost, and I don't want to try to say that actor's name because
Mhm.
I know I'm not going to say it correctly, but I do need to learn how to say the actor's name. But he had that kind of leading man air about him where it felt like, oh, this guy could play, in a romantic drama. He could do an action movie thing.
Yeah, it was very charismatic. Like you
Yeah.
understood why it was that everyone else was trying to follow this guy.
Yeah. And it felt like the perfect kind of outsider figure to create conflict because he talks like a reasonable person. You do listen when he speaks.
Yeah, and it's supposed to like he is embedded in this community. Like he knows everybody by first name. Like he's
That's Jasper,
okay.
not Jobby.
Okay, Jobby. No.
I'm talking about Jasper, the
Okay.
outsider.
I'm looking at the name. Sorry. All right. No, he was also great.
Uh, Evelyn Illy, I think that's how I pronounce her last name. But we've seen her before.
Where?
Saloom. She is the main woman in that movie that they meet when they come to Saloom.
Oh, the one that's like mute?
I think she might be. She had like her hair up in little buns.
Yeah.
Because I looked up the photo because I saw in her credit it said Saloom, and I was like, oh wow. Which was a Senegalese kind of action horror movie we saw last year.
It was so good.
Yeah. And she is Ivorian was the ethnicity, so I'm wondering if that's Ivory Coast.
Okay.
But she, out of everyone in the movie, if you're talking about like, oh, who you think could be a movie star, her, without a doubt. Like her look, the way she carries herself, her charisma, her performance, like she feels like someone like, oh, that is an actor right there.
Yeah, and like the way that they did the makeup, which was supposed to be like tribal markings, just even heightened her expressions when she spoke. Like you just could not take your eyes off of her. And like a lot of times when she was not in the scene, I was just like, where is she?
I was about to say, yeah, like when Priska is not in a scene, the movie does start to plod.
Yeah.
And I think she just has one of those faces that you like, she's got your attention.
Yes.
And you're interested to see what she's going to do and how she's going to react to things. And the dynamic between her and Jasper is what drives the movie.
Yeah, because you think that they're gonna end up together, and then
They
they
don't.
just don't. Like,
But I like that part was where it didn't do, and I think that's something that you have to go outside of Western films to find is we have such an expectation of tropes and formulas that when you go to someone who has been exposed to those, but through a different lens, they come out with a different interpretation than us.
well, it's also like this enjoyable thing where it's sort of like, just because I'm attracted to you does not mean I'm going to be disloyal to my mother and my sister. It's like
Yeah.
I've known them for longer and I know where their hearts are.
Overall, would you recommend Mami Wata to a general audience?
Yes, I would recommend it. Again, it's visually stunning. It's completely different from what you're going to normally see. And if you love samurai stories, I feel like take this and go with it. It feels close, but while also staying authentic to what it is.
Yeah, it kind of takes some of Kurosawa's film ideas where you have Yojimbo, the outsider samurai, but it kind of reverses it where the outsider here is part of the problem and it's
Yeah.
someone within the community but they also are like trying to figure out how do I break away from what my community's done for forever because that's why we ended up in this situation. I think the story is so straightforward that I couldn't imagine why anybody would feel lost watching it. It feels very relevant to now because it's this sort of reminded me of reading The Wretched of the Earth by Frantz Fanon, which I just read last month. And one of the parts he talks about post-colonialism, when a society is able to, rebel against the colonists who've come in, that there is this weird penchant for the society, especially the intellectuals in the society, the colonized intellectuals, who will want to emulate the romanticization of their culture's history in the same way that European colonizers do.
Yeah.
And how Fanon warns that like you can look back on your history and you should learn from it, and there are things you should treasure. He goes, but you also have to look at it with an honest lens and not whitewash over the things that were bad in the past.
Yeah.
And I think this film is very much about that idea of how much of tradition do we hold on to? How much of tradition do we give up? By giving up any tradition, are we opening the door to this sort of industrialized violence and greed? And how do we prevent that from happening while still bringing in those like essential amenities like schools and hospitals and things like that? But yeah, Mami Wata, a unique film that we do not get enough of. Brought back to life by an unorthodox scientist, a young woman runs off with a lawyer on a whirlwind adventure across the continents. Free from the prejudices of her time, she grows steadfast in her purpose to stand for equality and liberation. This is Poor Things, the latest film from Yorgos Lanthimos. Ariana, before we talk about Poor Things, I want to talk about our experiences with Yorgos Lanthimos.
Okay.
So there's a film of his you have not seen. I would say it's his breakout movie. I think he won, or it was at least nominated, if not he won an Oscar around 2008, 2009 for Dogtooth, which is a very interesting movie about, because Lanthimos is Greek, about a sheltered family of adult children who still behave like children and their weird parents. And it's a very good movie, and like most of Lanthimos' work, very dark.
Mm-hmm.
We saw Alps, which you probably don't even remember. It starred a lot of the actors he had from Dogtooth, still a Greek film. Not very memorable to me. It might be better if I go back and revisit it now, but didn't really stand out. The Lobster was the first Lanthimos movie you saw, and I believe was his first English language movie. Colin Farrell.
Yes.
What did you think of The Lobster? I know that people have very divergent views on Lanthimos' work.
I think it's a good film. I don't think it's one of my favorite films to go back to, but it is a fun film when you think about like reviewing it, right? There's different points of the stories. I don't remember the French director's name that we always say that he doesn't want actors, he want models.
Robert Bresson.
Yes,
Yes.
that is such the style of a few of his movies.
Lanthimos is kind of uh dark comedy Robert Bresson.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think now it's kind of changing, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah.
Uh, I think The Lobster, it is I could call it a romantic comedy without really feeling any romance.
It's a dark romantic
Yeah.
comedy.
Yeah.
Because the ending of that movie is quite bleak.
I forgot the ending. I think I just kind of like
The eyes. Okay. My favorite Yorgos Lanthimos movie was his next one, which we saw in the theater, The Killing of a Sacred Deer. He
Yeah.
reteams with Colin Farrell,
Yep.
Barry Keoghan. I've never
Yeah.
know how to pronounce that ugly son of a bitch's name, but he's a damn good actor. And Nicole Kidman. Right?
Yes.
Wow, what a movie. What did you think of The Killing of a Sacred Deer? Best spaghetti eating scene I've ever seen in a fucking movie.
I mean, again, I feel like it is, to me, it is more fun to talk about that film than to actually watch
Oh
it.
no, I'd rewatch it in a heartbeat.
I know you would.
That movie was, it's, if you want to know about me, I would say The Killing of a Sacred Deer encompasses everything I want out of a contemporary film. Where I am
I feel like it
stunned.
is the same way that you feel about novels.
Yeah, where it's like Ari Aster movies are kind of the same way. I want something in which I'm going to be disturbed, but that makes it so pleasant for me because it's like, oh wow, what a weird scenario. But I also want it to be grounded in a reality that makes sense on the terms of its own reality. It doesn't have to make sense on terms of my reality, but it has to be clear to me that like the person who made this, they have a clear vision, they're going somewhere with it, and that the weirdness, it means something even if they leave it ambiguous at the end for you to figure out.
Yeah.
And I think The Killing of a Sacred Deer has all of that in it. Then we reach his second most recent film, The Favorite, and his first film with Emma Stone. What did you think of that film?
I thought that was an amazing, like, acted film. Like, it was beautifully done, and it deserved all the Oscars that it got with the acting. I think
Olivia Colman.
Olivia Colman really became like a huge star after that. That now everybody recognizes her name.
And so now we reach Poor Things.
Yeah.
So just generally, we're going to get into lots of details here, but just Poor Things, how do you feel about this movie? How do you feel?
I have mixed feelings about this film. It is not because I dislike it, it is because I read the book. So I'm still torn between if I like the book or the film better. I'm leaning towards I like the film better. And mind you, it took me a while to finish that book because at the beginning, when I started reading it, I hated it. Like I was just like, oh fucking hell. Like I stopped reading it and I had to go back and force myself to finish it.
Was it the language it was written in was kind of dense and difficult to
It was
parse?
dense and difficult, and it was written in the perspective of the character Max McCandles.
Okay.
And he is very dislikable at times and hates Godwin Baxter, like detests him, thinks he's like the most grossest creature.
Which isn't conveyed in the film as much. Like he's kind of shocked by him, but I hates him. I don't get that vibe.
Well, like in the book, it's almost like he has a love/hate relationship with this man. He admires him, but cannot bear to take witness of like how his grotesque nature. Does not understand his experiments, but only knows that he is the most intelligent, like surgeon that he's ever met, and because of him, he's able to meet Bella.
I would say I loved this movie.
Yeah.
It, once again, this is also has a lot of things that I love in a movie where you're building a world that feels almost like an alien perspective of our world. So there's some familiar elements, but then there's also like certain ritual or tradition like things that feel that they aren't from this world. The fashion of the movie, There's a scene where they're in a church for the wedding, and the iconography that's used, there's crosses there, but the color, the presentation, the design, it's unlike any like chapel you've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And so it almost, to me, it's if an alien was just given, or almost like, let's say an AI was just given all of the information about humanity and then told to create a society, this would be what you would get, where it'd be familiar but weird and off.
It felt like more like if you decided to like tell a child to put together all their stuff that they liked.
Well, I think we also mentioned Roald Dahl while we were watching it last night,
Yes.
where it felt like an adult film set in a Roald Dahl universe.
Yeah, like if you took Pig in the City and made an adult version.
But a lot more fucking in it
Yeah.
than you know. Yeah.
And mind you, this film is supposed to be seen through the perspective of Bella.
And that's what makes it different from the book, is what it sounds
Yes.
like.
And there's a few things that they do change.
Let's not
But
spoil anything.
no.
I'll just say in general, from what I've heard, the ending of the book and the ending of the film are quite different from each other.
Oh yeah.
And come to possibly different conclusions.
Yeah, I mean, there's still like I think the ending of the book is just it's more heartbreaking because you're just like really, and then this one is just more like oh this
This is the most
uplifting.
This is the most hopeful Lanthimos movie I've ever seen.
Yeah, it is.
And I would say that's the one element of it I kind of don't like, is how it ends on such an upbeat note. And I was like, no, Lanthimos, you're supposed to end dark.
You're supposed to twist my heart a little bit.
So I hope this isn't a sign of things to come. Let's get into the performances. We'll start with Rami Youssef as Max McCandles. Rami Youssef is this actor I keep feeling like someone wants me to like this guy.
Did he used to be a comedian or something?
He is a comedian.
Okay.
He had a show on Hulu, I think, called Rami. I think that was the name of it.
Did we watch like
I watched the first episode and
Yeah.
it was the tone. It was trying to kind of be like Louis, but a lot of shows were trying to be like Louis at the time, and it just never really clicked for me. And I've seen some of his stand up, and it's just not my kind of stand up.
He's like millennial, Middle Eastern.
So yeah, it's a lot of those where you'll have comedians where it's sort of they're telling stories from their culture, which I think is good because it adds like a new perspective to comedy, but it's just not the kind of comedy that I seek out.
Okay,
The
but
tone,
him
yeah.
as a character.
But yeah, Rami Youssef as an actor in this film. What did you think of his job?
I thought he did fine. I honestly like he was not distracted by him compared to someone else that we will mention later.
But do you think it was even memorable at all?
No.
Yeah, I feel like it was one of those, it could have been any actor, honestly.
It could have been any actor, but thankfully he didn't take away from the scenes.
Yeah. Willem Dafoe as Godwin Baxter.
Willem Dafoe is always great. Like he's all the way in.
I saw someone saying that this movie was Lighthouse coded.
Yes.
Like this could take place in the same universe as The Lighthouse.
I completely understand that.
Yeah, Willem Dafoe, he really is just this actor who you can put him in any role and he just has the skills to find a way into it and you completely forget it's him. I mean, we recently watched Overnight, the documentary about that horrible asshole that made the Boondock Saints.
Yeah.
And that's another thing where I'm like, I hate that movie, but Willem Dafoe is fucking great in that movie.
Yeah.
Like, and that's the thing is he can be in the worst movies and he is still the best part of it.
He's still gonna give 110%. He does not care. He said yes. So he's gonna show up on time, he's gonna do his job, and he's gonna be happy to do the job.
And like the Godwin character, I wasn't sure where that character was going. I wasn't sure if he was going to be a villain. And then he is kind of, I mean, she calls him God. Bella does.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's clearly like a hit the theme on the nose with a hammer kind of a thing.
Yeah.
Where he is her God. But they have a very interesting relationship in that her God eventually leaves this earth. And there's kind of a question that she might become God in his stead. And I think to me, that's a very interesting metaphor of that we become our own gods upon a certain point in life. Like our parents are our gods.
Yeah. And I think what's great about the Godwin character is that he has no sexual desires towards Bella.
He's a eunuch.
He's a eunuch, but it's also like as part as it does in the book. I thought it was a great thing of showing this really fucked up version, like a different version of Frankenstein, that he's the one that's physically
His
like
father was the mad scientist.
he is the one that is all like physically distorted to be unappeasing towards people, but she is the reanimated creature who is beautiful and everybody is like in awe of her when they see her.
Well, I also liked all of the backstory about his fucked up childhood.
That he takes this as is.
But near the end of the movie, there's some mention about his father and goes, "My father was like a fucked up man."
Yeah,
And so
like
he's having this whole like arc behind the scenes of the movie.
it's much like how parents are. I mean, we don't have kids, but I do have a friend that has children, and she's like, as her child goes through the different ages, she starts to reflect the things that happened to her, and no longer viewing her parents as like these good people, but being like, okay, you kind of fucked me up in this area. So while he is technically raising Bella, he's starting to be like, now this is kind of fucked up. Like I fucked her up, and then I was fucked up by my own parents, and that shouldn't have been the case.
Well, I do find it interesting the moment where Godwin realizes he can't, when she says, if you do not let me go from this house, I will hate you forever. And he takes those words very seriously. And the idea of him that his child, quote unquote, would hate him for the rest of her life is enough for him to go, well, then I just have to let her go then.
Yeah.
And I thought that was like a turn that made that character so much more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And it showed you how much more progressive that character was in going like, well, I have to let her out into the world, right? Like that's what I have to do.
Yeah.
Mark Ruffalo as Duncan Wedderburn.
Oh my god, what a fucking delight.
What why isn't he Mark Ruffalo in more comedies?
I feel like the thing is like I feel like he's in a lot of like indie comedies that we don't want to watch, because I feel like the last trailer that I saw him in, Pink was in it, and it had to do with like people who were like in recovery, and we wanted
they're like
nothing
comedy
to do.
dramas.
Yeah.
And I feel like most comedy dramas are not that good. Like there used to be a time where a comedy drama was a good movie. Now they all feel so like movie of the week, like just
Yeah, you're
super
this
lame.
schleppy dude that's been fucking up, but he's gonna try again, guys, and he's gonna give all his heart and realize he can do better.
But Mark Ruffalo, first of all, his accent's horrendous, which is what makes the character so much interesting.
Yes.
But he is so good
because you can't pinpoint where the fucking accent
it sounds like a guy doing a fake accent. And
Yeah.
I think maybe that's what they leaned into was he can't do the accent. Let's just make that part of the character. But him playing a pathetic villain. It's not just playing a villain, but playing a pathetic villain who's lost already, like within just a handful of scenes into the movie. He is already lost.
Yeah.
That was so much fun to watch him do.
Yeah, I think what I love is also when he's like arguing with Bella, being like, no, don't fall in love with me. I have plenty of women who've fallen in love with me. And how like
she's like, oh, okay, I won't.
So he's like detailing all the times he's broken so many hearts, and he's not treating her like as if she was something really special, like to make the case against it, that when she takes him literally, he's kind of like, what? No, you're supposed to be charmed by me.
What's all his manipulations don't work on someone who views the world completely earnestly.
Yes.
They take you at your word. If you say, don't fall in love with me, they're gonna go, okay, I won't then. Thank you for letting me know. So Emma Stone as Bella Baxter.
God, what such good performances. There's so many times that she has to show an experience for the first time while being someone who she's like what in her early 30s now.
Well, it's things that we all take for granted because they are just the most basic aspects of like life.
Yeah. And her having to play it earnestly, and then also having to then act much like a child would by being like, hey, I discovered something that made me feel fantastic. Let me explain it to you because you don't know it yet. And I love that it's supposed to be like, well, no, God, which is Godwin, taught her all these things. So it's like, of course, she needs to show other people these things. They don't know it, which is like this weird, like, yes, it's a childlike self-centeredness. Like, I'm the first one to discover it.
Well, also, like, you model your behavior after your parent.
Yeah.
Godwin is antisocial, awkward, doesn't know how to see things outside of a scientific lens. And I love how that comes in with her vocabulary,
Yes.
where I forget the quote, but she understands some like insanely nuanced, like abstract
It was
concept.
like empathetically or like
Yeah, emphatically, but she can't understand like a basic thing that everybody knows how to do. I thought that was so good.
like it cracked me up because it felt like an argument that we've had. And I'll throw out a word and you're like, you can't pronounce this word without tumbling. Where the fuck is that?
I think the Bella Baxter character gives her a few challenges in that she's essentially playing multiple roles over the course of this movie because of
Yeah.
the growth that Bella goes through. And facial acting.
Yeah.
I think it was Mad Men was the first time I really keyed in on like, oh, you can tell an actor's good when they have no dialogue, but they're still performing.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what she has here, because she is the core of the film without a doubt. She's carrying this movie.
Yeah.
She has more lines than anyone else in the movie, but she also has lots of scenes where she's not talking. And it would be easy to make those the scenes where you're like, okay, and this is where Emma's going to be able to relax because the focus is on someone else. No. The whole focus of the movie is on her character from like as soon as she's introduced into the film to the end of the movie.
Yeah.
And the way Emma Stone transforms her own face in this movie, like there are moments where she's like zoned out or transfixed on something where she did not look like Emma Stone to me anymore. She looked like someone else.
Yeah.
And that was so remarkable to me because that type of transformation through acting it's not an accident. That is a conscious thing.
Yeah.
Because if you read about like sort of the acting process, there is a lot of like mirror work where you're looking in the mirror and you're trying to like figure out how do you want to be seen, and not just through makeup or hair, but through like how do I want the audience to understand this character even when they're not speaking.
Which is amusing to me because I feel like also neurodivergent people are guilty of doing that in front of a mirror.
Well, I think there've been a lot of people talking about this through a feminist lens, which I
Yes.
think is there. But one review I saw and something I felt watching the movie was I thought, oh, wow, yeah, I know exactly how this character is thinking and feeling. When someone's telling them something, they're accepting it at face value, and then the person who told them gets mad because they're like, but yeah, but then you're supposed to argue with me that I shouldn't do that kind of, and you're like, but you told me that's what you want to do. Why would I argue? Like, I don't, what do you want me to do? I mean, I've had moments of, where I've had, a lot of autistic stress, and I've told you, man, I wish people just handed you a card when you met them and it said, these are the topics I want to talk about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I saw so much of that in the Bella Baxter character.
Yes.
What did you think of the technical aspects of the movie?
I mean, visually, it was just stunning, even if it was sort of like you could tell that everything was kind of like man-made the most of the time.
Yeah.
Or hand painted or very selected as to the way that view was.
The digital effects were there to complement the analog effects and the performances.
Yes. And I particularly like enjoyed the shifting of colors to indicate her growth if you're paying attention. How certain things become very vibrant and colorful in the middle and it kind of dulls out like towards the end because that's how she's maturing over time.
Or how she's losing some of her spark. Once she starts to realize what the world of humans is.
Yes.
It's like, especially by the end, it gets pretty bleak for her.
Yeah, and it's again, it's heavily on Emma Stone's performance the whole entire time. Like also the discovery of herself as a person. And while we're talking about the feminist lens about it, it seems that a lot of the critiques is like, ugh, this movie's horrible because it's like basically she's a child in a woman's body, like indication. But I think it's really weird to put that critique because if you're telling me story-wise of this is happening, then we need to treat the character as if that is truly what's happening to them versus what is set upon in reality. In reality, I was born as a child, and my childhood while I was growing up, my body was that of a child, and then it developed, and the confusions of that those development. What's supposed to be with like Bella is she
Because her body's already developed. It's an
her
adult
body
body.
is already developed, and these curiosities that she's supposed to have about herself, she doesn't go through that to those transformations. It's just there. The discovery that seems childlike is having her realize it. And then also not having to deal with like what polite society is expecting of her because she's not going through life between this is what boys do and this is what girls do because Godwin doesn't apply that to her. Godwin is never like, you are different because you are a woman. It is, he's just sort of like treats her as a person.
Yeah.
And she develops on her own. And then later starts to understand that, like, for her, in order to get what she wants out of life, even though she has to play amongst the consequences, well, she's like, how do I do it in order for me to get some enjoyment out of this? So I'll ask you a series of questions and then I will respond back and you will do the following. Like she makes strategies for herself that I could say like that is very much what like a person in neurodivergency would do, right?
It's
Would
a
be like,
coping mechanism to get through social interactions as smoothly as possible.
yeah, she's like, I have a script, and this is the script that we're going to do, and it's going to make me feel comfortable in order to for the both of us to have the most pleasant experience that we can.
And
And
then that script is designed by her to put that other person at ease.
yes. And for her then to be able to then be at ease with them because they're following through with what she's asked and they're allowing her to have certain boundaries so she feels respected and cared for. And it's also the fact that like we never talk about as women about like when you're growing up the confusion that you have about your body, that even though it should be implemented like okay like woman representing female body and I will always be identified with this label because everyone has always put that label on me. It is the crucial thing of once you get to puberty and then the hormones kick in and that nobody explains to you what you are supposed to do and what you aren't supposed to do. With Bella,
then they get mad at you when you do things you're not supposed to do, even though they never let you know.
yes,
Yeah.
and it's with Bella, it is just supposed to be is like they emphasize on polite society. You should not self-stimulate in front of anybody because that's not polite society.
Well, then the dialogue that she has with Mark Ruffalo's character about what she should and shouldn't say at a dinner with friends.
Yeah.
And then how that plays out.
And it's like I do love the fact that the friends that she meets are like, well, polite society is just there to destroy you.
Yeah.
And she's kind of like, what?
Yeah. That like conformity is destruction of the self.
Yes.
Not the discovery of the self.
Yes. And it's that's where we meet the characters,
Harry and Martha von Kurtz. And I felt, yeah, Gerard Carmichael, I feel like was the one, and which was sad to me because I like him on other things, which he was with Christopher Abbott and that other film. He's very stiff, very wooden.
I think it probably was hard to get him to relax.
He's never been in anything this like stylized before, I feel like.
Mind you, I hope that he still picked up for other stuff and he starts to get more comfortable. It was just like that harsh thing of just being like in comparison to Rami Youssef, who did his job very okay, but didn't feel like a standout.
Yeah.
Versus like Carmichael, which was just very obvious.
Very obvious, like one of these things is not like the other kind of thing. I liked the well there's one thing I saw in a review where somebody and I feel like they thought they were making a dig at the movie, and to me I'm like, no, you struck upon like the point of the movie where they're like, So we're just supposed to watch this movie, and it's this woman who is actually her own child's brain and the corpse of its mother. And part of me thought, isn't that what being a woman is in Western society, right? Like, I'm not a woman, but from what I've heard, it sounds like your mother is this force that puts all these expectations of who you should be onto you, and those are informed by who she feels that she has to be.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what I feel like almost Godwin's experiment was trying to get away from, is let's create a new person who's a woman and doesn't have those expectations they have to live by. And so by the time we get to the end of the movie and Bella finds out who she was in her past life and how bad it fucking was,
Yeah.
she has forged herself into a new person so that she's not afraid to confront that
Yeah.
and deal with it.
And that is something that is kind of endearing about the film, especially about Bella, is how she's kind of like, I know this isn't good for me entirely, but I need to go investigate this and discover it, and it has to be on my own terms, which is very much, you could be like, that's a scientific point, but it's also her understanding, like, I have to develop myself. I have to grow beyond where I am at this moment. So the moment she meets Mark Ruffalo's character, she like tells like Godwin, if you don't let me go, I'll hate you. But she's like, this is for now. This is for fun, which makes the Mark Ruffalo's character so fucking mad when she's like, oh no, you're a phase.
Well, because he's a rake, as they call him, which is this old term for someone who would basically take advantage of a young girl's feelings, have sex with them,
Yeah.
and then dump them.
Yeah.
And that all gets reversed. He's the one who, I love the scene where he's outside her room at the brothel, like it's almost like childish whine crying.
Yes.
And she's so over him at that point and so annoyed by him.
Yeah, and like it's this interesting thing that when she's in the brothel, I feel like people have skimmed over the fact that when she's talking to the mistress, she's like, I will work for 20 minutes a day, and the rest of the day I will be educating myself upon my own leisure. Did everyone fucking miss that point? Because she's making
Well, a lot of people going like, oh, the scene where the father has sex with her in front of his two kids. And I want to go, okay, first of all, if you notice the way that scene was cut, the two kids were not in the room when the simulated sex was happening. And also, do you think Yorgos Lanthimos is saying the things in this movie are things that people should do? And this is where we get into one of my problems with Western media and art literacy. I feel like media literacy in America is so poor that it's simply best to just ignore the opinions of most Americans than it is to engage with them, because they do not understand like how you can take like something this stylized and this hyper real, and like they think that depiction is endorsement. And I'm like, so do you think when like people get shot in movies, the movie wants? I mean, I guess if you look at the way Americans behave, yeah, they do think that's what movies are saying for you to do, right?
Like this sad thing of assuming that just because Emma Stone played a Disney villain and had that huge,
She was a Disney villain.
oh yeah, remember the Dalmatian one, whatever.
Oh, Cruella de Vil. I tried to purge that shit out of my
And,
brain.
like it, because she holds so much weight, it's supposed to be like, oh well, that part of the film, I'm like, you're not understanding this director. If you watch The Favorite, we weren't supposed to be like, my God, I'm supposed to be on side of the queens, and like,
Yeah, like
how selfish everybody was.
everybody in The Favorite was like an awful person.
Yeah, and it's also supposed to be indicating that like there's something fucked up with the dad who can proceed to fornicate with a prostitute in front of his own children, because that is a fucked up thing.
Yeah, like Yorgos Lanthimos would probably agree with you and go, yeah, father shouldn't do that.
And like
I didn't put that in the
and,
movie
like,
to go,
it's
yeah, dad
supposed
should
to
do
be,
this.
like this funny thing where like he's like giving instructions. I think it's supposed
And
to
they're
be like,
incorrect too.
and she goes, no, not actually. And then like towards the end,
He can't climax.
She's kind of done, and so she's like, either a finger in the asshole or a choke will quicken it, because she doesn't want to keep having sex with him.
And she does that, and he's like, no, and then it makes him finish. And so I think the thing there is You have adult men trying to instruct young boys on matters in which the adult men have no idea what they're fucking talking
And they're
about.
talking about pleasing a woman
Yeah.
when she sort of like is a woman and is like, this is not pleasing me.
Yeah. And what she does in that moment is actually instruct those boys in a way that's helpful that the father was not.
Yeah.
Now, once again, Yorgos Lanthimos doesn't think that fathers should go out and do that with their children. Yorgos Lanthimos also doesn't think that you should transplant infant brains into corpses and reanimate them. I think he would be, if someone was trying to pass a law to make that legal, Yorgos Lanthimos would say he's against that law.
I feel like more like he just wants to tell stories that haven't really been told or in a different atmosphere.
And I think he does like to be provocative. Like,
yeah.
Dogtooth is a movie like probably most of the people who've seen Poor Things haven't seen. I'm sure some have, but most people haven't seen it. And I'm like, they would hate Dogtooth. There's a whole incest subplot between the brother and one of the sisters. But it makes sense because the point of the movie is these people are trapped in isolation. They're adults now, and their bodies have things they're telling them to do. And so they do them. But it's not an endorsement. And once again, that's why I'm like, most mainstream Western film interpretation is so like Disney basic level shit.
Yeah.
That like they don't understand a piece of art when they look at it. Everything is so caught up in the transactional nature of life, which is becoming increasingly ever more transactional, that when you present them with a film like this that's about what is the meaning of life, like what are we here to do, what are we here to do with the things that we learn and the experiences that we have, they focus on just surface level, like Emma Stone showed her titties and was humping, and you're like, yeah, okay. Did you think about what that meant in the context of like what the movie was trying to say about like women and sexuality? And the thing is, it's annoying is is this very like Gen Z, more millennial, and almost say like Puritanism I see in people talking about media that just feels like, yeah, the place where you can do these things is art because they're simulated and they're supposed to have a meaning beyond just the act of doing them. In real life, if this was happening, yes, you should be against it.
I think it's also like this weird thing about the puritanical acts of it, just how uncomfortable people are with sex on film, especially lately.
Like Marvel movies, completely sexless.
Yeah,
Star Wars movies, completely sexless.
There's no, people are supposed to be hooking up in private or just being pals. And therefore, it leaves a lot of confusion as to what happens when the doors are closed and it's just you and them. So that means, so we're supposed to be dictated on how our sexual experiences go through Pornhub?
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
There's not enough talks about consent, even though there's like the Me Too movement. There's too much like narration that's solely based on one person versus showing an example of what that relationship could be when two or more people are actively engaged in it. And that is a problem when you aren't able to see it, because when there's just a narration of someone, like you're watching a TikTok or a YouTube, it just sounds like your inner monologue as to what you're supposed to say, not understanding that when you say no, what is the response going to be? Or if you don't like something, how are you supposed to guide the person? And that's a problem in so many ways, because it's like, it shouldn't just be up to when you're going to go fucking jerk off or watch porn.
Well, that's how sex has become transactional, right?
Yeah.
Like sex is when you're horny and so you jerk off. But it's like, but that's not what it is. And like sex work is work too. And what I liked about the movie was when Bella starts to bring up those questions of, why would these men want to have sex with me if I don't want to have sex with them?
Yeah.
And that's a really great question that no one's asking in our society, when it's something that's a very big part of what's going on in this like unhinged hyper masculinity discourse that's going on. Of the thing is, well, why don't you make the woman like you if you want to have sex with her rather than just force it upon her?
Like the fact that like, the madam of the brothel just tells her, but here's the thing, there are some men who like it when you don't want to
Well,
have sex
and
with
that
them.
madam to me is very much a representation of like capitalist ideology.
Yeah, she's like, the thing is, like, the funny thing, she is not the worst character in the film. She's not evil, but she's not good. She is there to make a profit.
Well, I mean, I think ultimately she is evil, but the way she presents herself is very unassuming. Like she exists and she does.
Well, I think it's that moment when Bella is sitting and she's talking about she's starting to feel numb and how she's starting to feel anger seep in. And it's such a great scene because, again, Emma Stone is delivering it with her facial expression. She's non-smiling, she's staring up at the ceiling. And the woman is like, but that's great because once you go through this, you will have another certain type of happiness go through this, but you have to feel this.
Well,
And
and the visuals of that scene where they're laying on the bed to me seem to harken back to the reanimation flashback.
yeah,
And to me, it's like this is a new reanimation. She's gone through this period of like hypersexuality, and it's an exaggeration, but mirroring the human experience, right? You discover physical pleasure and it becomes a fixation on your young mind.
yeah,
And then there's a certain point where you still understand the necessity of that in your life, but you also start to understand that your human experience is greater than just self-gratification.
yeah.
And there's bigger things and ideas that exist.
Yeah, and there's also when you start thinking about the woman, like you're thinking about Bella in a feminist like lens, is when she and I forgot the name of Mark Ruffalo's character are
Duncan, whatever,
yeah,
Earn, I
Duncan,
think.
blah blah blah, are in shambles. They're like living on nothing. She's about to go into prostitution. Then she's kind of like, I can't live with you anymore. I want to figure out how I get through this on my own. So I'm gonna pull out the money that Godwin gave me, and he's kind of like angry at her
You had
because
money this whole time?
yeah, and it's this anger that he has towards her. Well, then afterwards, once she's like come back home, um, he sets out to destroy her. He sets out to end her in some way after she's had her satisfaction with multiple men.
Well, because that's not the way the story was supposed to go for him. The story was he was supposed to get tired of her and he was supposed to dump her.
And that she eventually was going to go back and try to destroy him in some way that wouldn't like have made a connection whatsoever.
Because that's what has made him feel powerful his whole life. And he's finally
Yeah.
met someone who doesn't exist within the social understanding that he does. And his entire system and manipulation and uh use of people as objects like completely falls apart. I loved at the end his hair almost looks like a receding hairline in the
Yeah.
church when he shows up, and he just reached his most like pathetic zenith. Uh I don't want to talk about who he is in relation to Bella, but I just want to talk about Christopher Abbott's role as Alfie. We'll just say Alfie.
Alfie.
What a performance for such a small role.
Yeah, he like I think, and this is not a surprise, he's probably one of the best actors we have right now.
He consistently, when he shows up for something, no matter the scope of the part, he nails it.
And like he has been developing this craft for a while. Like, because I remember the first time we ever saw him was in Girls, and he left Girls because he was like, I felt like this is a shallow project, only to come back in the later season.
Well, I mean, so we've seen him in things like Sanctuary recently, which was great with Margaret Qualley again, who's in this as well. I think Possessor was a great performance from him. But yeah, he does seem to be one of those actors that can do multiple types of roles.
Yeah.
Sometimes you run into actors and you're like, oh, I can kind of see that type.
Mm-hmm.
Like Willem Dafoe is almost like that. He can play very eccentric characters.
Yeah.
Christopher Abbott can run the gamut. He could be a leading man. He could be a supporting role. He could be a villain. He can be a heroic character. He seems to have that kind of range.
Yeah.
And the way he plays the role of Alfie in this movie, he is so like comically, but still intimidatingly evil.
Yeah.
And that's a tightrope to walk where you're kind of cartoonish, but I'm still scared of you.
Yeah.
Uh, so wrapping it up, because there's a lot you could talk about in this movie. Poor Things, a film that we recommend for everyone.
Oh God, I almost want to gatekeep it to a certain degree.
I'll go ahead. No,
Mm.
I would say I would watch some other Yorgos Lanthimos movies before you watch this, and if you don't like those, you're not gonna like this one.
No, and this one was like visually stunning. That I read that apparently like he even had some sets with squishy floors
Oh, I like that.
in order to force the other actors to like try to walk normally compared to Emma, who would have to like she was balancing herself. And
Yep.
that like so it even furthered her weird walking.
Sound like it was very collaborative between Lanthimos and Stone. So that's why people who are going like, "Oh, this is through such a male gaze." Everything I'm reading is she informed the movie more than any other person involved in the movie.
Yeah, I mean like it's weird to think about it because like even the sex scenes felt more female driven.
One, like they weren't arousing scenes, in my opinion.
No,
That's the part where people are calling like pornographic, and I'm like, do you understand what the term pornography means? It's meant to like titillate and arouse. I found the sex scenes in this movie to be comical or mechanical or dull,
yeah.
and you can see it reflected in like her face, right? Like especially that part you're talking about where she finally is saying, I feel numb, I feel like I don't feel anything. It becomes just a job to her.
Yeah.
So once again, we come back to the question: would you recommend this movie to a general audience?
No, I feel like if you are gonna get easily upset over that much sex in a fictional character by your it's some weird way of just being like it's a child when it's not. She's a whole new fucking thing. Like Godwin says it best is like you created yourself, Bella. And that's the most empowering part of the film.
Well, because like he really does not set boundaries for her beyond the most basic safety standards.
Yeah.
And like he lets her physically assault people in the house. He lets her just wander in the house wherever she wants. And so yeah, it really is it's a movie about a self-created person,
Yeah.
which to me, being neurodivergent, I felt a lot of connections to like this movie, but I think we're both on the same page in maybe this movie just isn't meant for the audience that Searchlight Pictures put it out for. Like Lanthimos movies, they're not like wide audience movies. They're just not. But he makes damn good movies, and this has me very interested to see what he is going to do next, and hopefully with Emma Stone. Well, we hope you enjoyed this episode of the Pop Cult Podcast. Make sure to check our show notes for any links to relevant reviews we discussed, and also a link to our website, popcult.blog. Make sure that you subscribe wherever it is you listen to podcasts so you'll be notified when new episodes are up. If you visit popcult.blog, you'll find even more reviews there of all different kinds: television, movies, comic books, and more. March, we're starting a new series for the first half of the month, which is called Wiseman's Eye, and it is composed of some of the documentaries of the great filmmaker Frederick Wiseman, who just released a new film. We're going back and looking at a lot of his sort of social institution films. So what you'll be seeing in the coming week is Tittycut Follies, which is about a mental health facility in Massachusetts, High School, which is what it's about, Law and Order, which follows police in Kansas City, Missouri, and Juvenile Court, which takes place in Memphis, Tennessee. Next week on the podcast, we will be reviewing Denis Villeneuve's Dune Part 2, as well as going back and looking at one of his earlier films, Polytechnic. If you enjoy what we do on popcult.blog and what we do on this podcast, we would encourage you to support us on Patreon. We've got different reward levels for you to choose from. I want to thank our current patrons, Becca and Matt, who both donate at the writer's room level. That gets them the ability to pick one movie a month that I will watch and review. If you donate at that level, you can leave your comments on your review as well. No matter what level you donate on our Patreon, you will get access to patron-exclusive podcasts, one of which we will be debuting a new season of this coming Saturday. That would be Saturday, March 9th. And that will be Screenplay, where Ariana and I play GM-less tabletop roleplay games. I think this one's going to be exceptionally fun. Well, until next time, you keep listening, we'll keep watching.